welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on May 21st. I got another round of stories to talk to you guys about around the NFL, starting with the continual series on here, the quarterback rankings, the divisional quarterback rankings, this time in the NFC West. Later on, we'll talk about some storylines to follow along around the Los Angeles Rams and some questions still that need answers heading now into the OTA period of the offseason. Plus, we're going to be talking about the NFL sort of working around the college football playoffs and how an expanded college football playoffs had something to do a little bit with why the NFL took a little bit longer to come out with their schedule. All that plus much more on today's show. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your question pop up in my chat box. I'll read it on air and just get your guys' perspective on anything I say or any of the topics we have on hand today. It's a massive help for the show. So if you would, please use the tip and donations link again, which is GSMCPodcast.net. But in saying that, we can move along a little bit now to the rankings, the divisional rankings now in the NFC West. We've gone through almost the entirety of the NFC. This will be the last one before we move on to the AFC. So, not as hard as yesterday's. Yesterday's was a lot more challenging than I originally thought, but now hopefully it'll be a little bit simpler with a division that has been pretty much top heavy and has been the usual top two teams for the good amount of time being. So with that being said, we'll start, of course, with the number 4 spot being Geno Smith. You know, back-to-back years, oddly enough, at 9 and 8. He is 33 years old, and he is the second oldest quarterback in this division. So, in saying that, he's come a long way, honestly, when you think about it, from his time with the Jets and journeying around some teams. He was with the Giants at one point as well, finding a home in Seattle, stepping in there after Russell Wilson left, and having a very tremendous first year there as the starter. Threw for over 4,200 yards, 69% completion percentage, 30 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. And then subsequently after that offseason that followed, he earned that 3-year, $75 million extension. And with those sort of numbers, I don't think anybody really questioned it. Of course, there were some doubts with his past, but just based off of last year, he got that extension. And then since then, it's not like he hasn't, it's hard to say he has lived up to it, because 3 years, $75 million, $25 million per year is a bargain now, honestly, at the rate that starting quarterbacks are getting on a year-to-year basis. So from that standpoint, and the sort of production you're getting from Geno Smith is worthy of that contract, and he hasn't played awful, to say the least, but at the same time, with the Seattle Seahawks offense, the entirety of the roster, they still have some great pieces. DK, Kenneth Walker looked good this past season. Jackson Smith and Jigba also is a good piece that they have there. Tyler Lockett is sort of slowing down, but he is a little bit more of a reliable weapon. Looking at that team that they have with Geno Smith, he can provide some things. His arm is still all right, but physically, he can't really escape the pocket as well and sort of produce those sort of plays with this team anymore. And if you don't have that sort of quarterback kind of carrying the load with the level of talent that they have on this roster, it's going to be hard to get better than 9 and 8 or 10 and 7 at most, especially in that division. And because of that, and projecting now more into the future with Geno Smith, I have him in as the number 4 quarterback in this list. They have a new head coach coming in as well, Mike McDonald, so hopefully he gets more out of Geno Smith, but that's also something to monitor going forward, how that whole quarterback situation pans out over this year and into next offseason. But now moving on to number 3, we have Kyler Murray, quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals, signed that massive extension, I want to say 2 years ago, and that locked him in through the 2028 season. And really the story around Kyler Murray, at least for me, seeing him play out there, the stature obviously stands out. It has been a major talking point of his since he came into the league. Standing at 5'10", not the biggest guy, but he is a nightmare to tackle one-on-one, and he can and has shown to have the ability of extending plays. A nightmare, like I mentioned again, to tackle one-on-one because of how small he is. He's super fast and super agile, and these guys that have these baseball backgrounds, I always think have the insane ability of throwing some crazy throws, have all the arm mechanics and all the attributes they get from playing baseball. He has that same thing, similar to Patrick Mahomes, and I think that just makes him exceed some of the difficulties that might get in his way with the smaller stature, throwing over guys, throwing in from some weird angles. Having that baseball background certainly helps, and he has that over Geno Smith. He is a little bit younger than him. I want to say he's 28, 27 years old. So at this point, he's sort of entering those prime years where you really want to get the most out of Kyler Murray now that you can't say, he's young, he's developing, now he is heading into those prime years. It's hard to tell really how great he can be, just based off of his natural talent. You can sort of project it, but with the team around him, they don't really do enough to help him, in my opinion. But now, you draft Marvin Harrison Jr., you get him a legit number one receiver, and with Jonathan Gannon in there as well, I think we saw some improvements. Trey McBride as well, their tight end showed some good flashes as well. So I kind of like the way that they're going. He will have more help this year, but it's still not enough really to get too excited about this team. I probably still expect them to finish third at best, if not fourth in this division, just because of the lack of talent. But they are trending in the right direction, and just to sort of emphasize this sort of impact that Kyler Murray makes with this team. He only played 8 games last season, and it was extremely noticeable when he came back after that time away. Playing those last 8 games, he produced 13 touchdowns, rushing and passing on his own, and nearly threw for 2,000 yards in only 8 games. So on that pace, he was on a trajectory to have a great year with the lack of talent as well on that team. I think that says a lot about Kyler, and if they could have some more pieces around him, I think he could definitely challenge for second, maybe, who knows, maybe even first in this division on how the other quarterbacks pan out. But he slides in at number 3. Then moving on to my top 2, Matthew Stafford comes in at number 2 for me. Dealt with injuries a lot last year, but still managed to play 15 games overall for the Los Angeles Rams. And you think back right away to that trade with the Detroit Lions for Jared Goff, and the payback you got for really gambling away a lot of your future with all of those picks, really you could say paid off, because you got in the end what you were looking for all this time. You got that Super Bowl with the generational talent that you had in Aaron Donald. It would have been such a waste for the Los Angeles Rams, and I'm sure Aaron Donald as well, if they would have never won a Super Bowl with how good that defense was as well. They added Jalen Ramsey that year, plus Matthew Stafford. They had Odell Beckham. Cooper Kupp was going crazy. That was the year it had to happen. They brought Matthew Stafford in, and it paid off. Their gamble paid off, getting them that Super Bowl, and he won the Comeback Player of the Year. He made a Pro Bowl, and throughout his whole career, the narrative around Matthew Stafford was that he was stuck in a bad situation with the Lions. He has a crazy arm, still very precise and very still underrated in a lot of senses around the league, but he still has that arm. Obviously, he's not going to create these extended plays for you right now at the age of 36. He just turned 36, but still, he fits this team perfectly. He is the ideal leader to lead this very young team defensively and offensively as well. Even with that young team, the question sort of pops up that he might have exceeded expectations, just because you have a lot of uncertainties. Nobody knew how good Puka was going to be, and not even Kyron Williams, all the young stars on defense as well. To say that he led them to where they did get in the playoffs, I think sort of exceeded expectations because of all the uncertainty, and he has proven he can do it compared to the other two, getting into the playoffs and getting that far. Kyler made the playoffs, but he lost and had a very bad showing. Geno really hasn't been there with the Seattle Seahawks team, or he might have been there once, but at the end of the day, Matthew Stafford has proven it. He is a seasoned veteran, and he slides in at my number 2 overall spot, which only leaves, obviously, Brock Purdy, the 49ers quarterback, as my number 1 quarterback, slowly showing what level he can truly reach. I really believe that. heading into his third year now. He has been to at least the NFC Championship game each year that he's been in the NFL, which is remarkable. And again, the whole narrative around him is that his team is just super talented. How could he not get that far? Well, that does hold some merit, at least for me. A lot of teams, a lot of quarterbacks, I should say, actually have that great of a team, but if the quarterback's not great, if there's too much pressure on him, too much expectations, he'll crumble, and it really isn't as simple as it seems to just be plugged in there and be on the same page as everybody, especially where he was drafted, the last pick of the whole draft, to manage and handle all that pressure on him right away, get the team to the NFC Championship game, and more so this year, being more pivotal in that journey to get to the Super Bowl this time around, having some big plays down the stretch against the Packers and the Detroit Lions especially. He led some great drives, had some very impressive throws, and extended a lot of plays to get some crucial first downs. I think, again, I mentioned it before, I think we're only really seeing the tip of the iceberg with Brock Purdy. I'm very excited to see him grow more and more when he gets into year 6 or 7 like some of these other quarterbacks. I think he's on a very good start. If this team stays together, I don't see how he can continuously perform as he has these last 2 seasons. Just last year, he was top 5 in passing yards, top 3 in touchdowns thrown, first in QBR, and second in completion percentage. That just doesn't happen just because you have a great team. There's a lot of merit on the quarterback and a lot of factors that they have to go through. I think he's handled it very well and has just fit into this 49ers team perfectly for the amount of talent that they have, back-to-back NFC Championship games. I think he's done a very good job of doing that, leading this team and just really not blinking at some of these high-pressure moments. I think it's something to be very impressed with. I certainly have been, and that's why he takes my number 1 spot in the rankings today. So, again, as always, let me know what you guys think of the rankings. This one was a little bit simpler for me. I hope some of you guys agree. Let me know if you don't. If you have a different order than me, let me know in the live chat box or in the comment section after the episode as well. But in the meantime, we will be moving on with the rest of the show. More topics coming up, like I mentioned, the Los Angeles Rams and some storylines to follow along with them throughout the offseason, as well as the NFL having to work around the college football playoffs now, an extended format, how they were able to do that. Plus, more on the 49ers discussing their new defensive coordinator and how maybe the addition of Brandon Staley could hinder and have some issues there between the two of them. Stay tuned to find out more on those stories. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.